Hi, I'm Tyler Folse. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry, from engineering to operations to emergency response. I don't claim to know everything there is to know nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. If you like this video, please give me a like down below, and go ahead and hit the subscribe button to find out when more videos like this are coming. If you didn't like this video, please let me know down in the comments. Always looking to improve. Today we're going to be looking at a series of 3 old school Kurzgesagt videos on nuclear energy. They're about 7 years old. It'll be interesting to see if they're up to the same current amazing standard as far as Kurzgesagt videos go. Let's take a look. This first video is called Nuclear Energy Explained. How does it work? Let's fact check this.
Have you ever been in an argument about nuclear power? We have.
Yes.
We found it frustrating and confusing, so let's try and get to grips with this topic. It all started in the 1940s. After the shock and horror of the war and the use of the atomic bomb, nuclear energy promised to be a peaceful spin-off of the new technology, helping the world get back on its feet. Everyone's imagination was running wild. Would electricity become free? Could nuclear power help settle the Antarctic? Would there be nuclear-powered cars, planes,
I haven't actually heard the Antarctic one. That's kind of cool.
houses? It seemed that this was just a few years of hard work away. One thing was certain, the future was atomic. Just a few years later, there was a sort of atomic age hangover. As it turned out, nuclear power was very complicated and very expensive. Turning physics into engineering was easy on paper, but hard in real life. Also,
Sense about expensive, we're talking tens of billions of dollars in today's money for a full-scale nuclear plant.
private companies thought that nuclear power was much too risky as an investment. Most of them would much rather stick with gas, coal, and oil. But there were many people who didn't just want to abandon the promise of the atomic age, an exciting new technology, the prospect of enormously cheap electricity, the prospect of being independent of oil and gas imports, and in some cases, a secret desire to possess atomic weapons.
Here we go.
Provided a strong motivation to keep going. Nuclear power's finest hour finally came in the early 1970s, when war in the Middle East caused oil prices to skyrocket worldwide. Now, commercial interest and investment picked up at a dazzling pace. More than half of all the nuclear reactors in the world were built between 1970 and 1985. But which type of reactor to build, given how many different types there were to choose from? A surprising underdog candidate won the day, the light water reactor. It wasn't very innovative, and it wasn't too popular
That's the type of reactor that I worked at.
with scientists, but it had some decisive advantages. It was there, it worked, and it wasn't terribly expensive. So, what does a light water reactor do? Well, the basic principle is shockingly simple. It heats up water using an artificial chain reaction. Nuclear fission releases several million times more energy than any
I love their little footnotes. Yes.
chemical reaction could. Really heavy elements on the brink of stability, like uranium-235, get bombarded with neutrons. The neutron is absorbed, but the result is unstable. Most of the time, it immediately splits into fast-moving lighter elements, some additional free neutrons, and energy in the form of radiation. The radiation heats the surrounding water, while the neutrons repeat the process with other atoms, releasing more neutrons and radiation in a closely controlled chain reaction. Very different from the fast, destructive runaway reaction in an atomic bomb.
Yes, the fuel composition is way different. We're talking on the orders of 2 to 4% enriched versus in excess of 90%. That's one of the key differences.
Light water reactor, a moderator is needed to control the neutron's energy. Simple, ordinary water does the job, which is very practical since water's used to drive the turbines anyway. The light water reactor became prevalent because it's simple and cheap. However, it's neither the safest, most efficient, nor technically elegant nuclear reactor. The renewed nuclear hype lasted barely a decade though.
Yeah, for light water reactors, it's the same steam turbine technology that's existed for over 200 years. The only thing difference is your heat source is nuclear fission, as they just described, to produce heat.
In 1979, the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania barely escaped a catastrophe when its core melted. In 1986, the Chernobyl catastrophe directly threatened Central Europe with a
It's actually a good summary. Barely escaped catastrophe. So no, because nothing went through the containment building. So there were 0 deaths associated with that, where it's usually overplayed. A lot of people think more people died than what was initially thought with 3 Mile Island, but everything was contained there.
Active cloud, and in 2011, the drawn-out Fukushima disaster sparked new discussions and concerns. While in the 1980s, 218 new nuclear power reactors went live, their number and nuclear's global share of electricity production has stagnated since the end of the 80s. So what's the situation today? Today, nuclear energy meets around 10% of the world's energy demand. There are about 439 nuclear reactors in 31 countries. About 70 new reactors are under construction in 2015, most of them in countries which are growing quickly. All in all, 160 new reactors are planned worldwide.
This is a few years old. That number has changed a little bit. It's actually gone down.
Most nuclear reactors were built more than 25 years ago with pretty old technology. More than 80% are various types of light water reactor. Today, many countries are faced with a choice: the expensive replacement of the aging reactors, possibly with more efficient but less tested models, or a move away from nuclear power towards newer or older technology with different cost and environmental impacts. So, should we use nuclear energy? The pro and contra arguments will be presented here next week.
And we're going to get right into those. Not a bad introduction. I could tell that this is clearly one of their earlier videos. But let's go ahead and take a look at the next one. All right, this next video is 3 reasons why nuclear energy is terrible. Oh boy.
3 reasons why we should stop using nuclear energy. 1.
In that initial picture, they actually showed the goo as yellow. If you're not familiar with my channel, I regularly talk about the green being unrealistic. Yellow's still unrealistic, but it's just different.
Nuclear weapons proliferation. Nuclear technology made a violent entrance onto the world stage. Just 1 year after the world's first ever nuclear test explosion in 1944, 2 large cities were destroyed by just 2 single bombs. After that, reactor technology slowly evolved as a means of generating electricity, but it's always been intimately connected with nuclear weapons technology. It's nearly impossible to develop nuclear weapons without access to reactor technology. In fact, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty serves the purpose of spreading nuclear reactor technology without spreading nuclear weapons with limited success. In 40 years, 5 countries have developed their own weapons with the help of reactor technology. The fact of the matter is that it can be very hard to distinguish a covert nuclear weapons program from the peaceful use of nuclear energy.
It's actually not entirely true. Again, you need the additional infrastructure to further enrich uranium to get those 90+% levels. It's going to be a massive facility with a bunch of centrifuges designed to force the material into that. You don't need nearly as much of that for lower enrichment technology. So that's one way to tell. I can kind of get what they're driving at, but most inspectors, when looking at a facility, they know what to look for.
In the 1970s, the big nuclear powers were happily selling peaceful technology to smaller countries, which then developed weapons of their own. The road to deadly nuclear weapons is always paved with peaceful reactors. 2. Nuclear waste.
Not necessarily the case. You don't always need a reactor either to make it. You could just get your hands on some material, usually plutonium, and then it just comes into the fabrication process of how to make a nuclear warhead, or talking way smaller scale, a dirty bomb. But you don't. So you need reactors to synthesize the material, but you can obtain it somewhere else, such as, say, terrorists getting their hands on a less regulated nuclear weapons program from North Korea, as an example, or a lot of the former Soviet states. So you don't necessarily need a reactor in order to start your own nuclear weapons program. You could steal it just like anything else.
And pollution. Spent nuclear fuel is not only radioactive, but also contains extremely poisonous chemical elements like plutonium. It loses its harmfulness only slowly over several tens of thousands of years. And there is also a process called reprocessing, which means the extraction of plutonium from spent nuclear fuel. It can be used for two purposes: to build nuclear weapons or to use it as new fuel. But hardly any of it is used as fuel because we don't have the right kind of reactors for that. A milligram will kill you, a few kilograms make an atomic bomb, and even an inconspicuous...
The irony about the not reactors for that is because it's this circular logic with reprocessing. It's like, well, we don't want these reprocessing facilities because, as I mentioned earlier, it'd be easier for terrorists or the bad guys to get their hands on this nuclear material that could make bombs. Even though we could develop reactors, there's that security concern over that outweighs the willingness for a lot of companies to build these reactors that would use more of plutonium and other transuranic elements. Yeah. It's a shame, though, because this is just another form of recycling that could make nuclear energy even more sustainable than it already is.
A country like Germany literally has tons of the stuff just lying around because reprocessing sounded like a good idea decades ago. And where will all the waste go?
Decades ago, they weren't as concerned about terrorism.
After dumping it into the ocean was forbidden, we've tried to bury it, but we can't find a place where it will definitely stay secure for tens of thousands of years. Over 30 countries operate nearly 400 reactors, managing several hundred...
Most of it is stored on site now, at least within the United States. The United States had this one repository that was going to be used, but the federal government eventually flip-flopped on using Yucca Mountain as a long-term repository. It's difficult to be this forward-thinking when modern civilization hasn't been around that long. Looking tens of thousands of years in the future is a challenge.
Thousands of tons of nuclear waste, and only one is currently serious about opening a permanent civilian waste storage: tiny Finland. 3. Accidents and disasters. Over 60 years of nuclear power usage, there have been 7 major accidents in reactors or facilities dealing with nuclear waste. 3 of those were mostly contained, but 4 of them released significant amounts of radioactivity into the environment. In 1957, 1987, and 2011, large areas of land in Russia, Ukraine, and Japan were rendered unfit for human habitation for decades to come.
I know about the Chernobyl exclusion zone, Japan. Large areas. You don't want to be near where the exactly where the Fukushima reactor was at the time, but no. The only one that has that large exclusion zone is where Chernobyl was in Pripyat in Ukraine.
The number of deaths is highly disputed, but probably lies in the thousands. These disasters happened with nuclear reactors of very different types.
Okay, I can tell that this is some of their old information. Kurzgesagt, and I did another video later that talked about nuclear accidents, and looks like they backpedaled on how many deaths actually occurred to this. It was not in the thousands. I'll put a link to my reaction to that in the description, but looks like this is just a case of a video being old and furtherly being supplanted by a more recent video.
Very different countries and several decades apart. Looking at the numbers, we may as well ask ourselves, are 10% of the world's energy supply worth a devastating disaster every 30 years?
Again, they later look at and these disasters have been heavily overblown. Chernobyl's the only real bad one that resulted in multiple deaths directly related to the facility. Fukushima, no one died as a result of radiation or what was going on with the actual plant. 5,000 people died due to an earthquake and tsunami that affected the area, and yet all people can remember is talking about the nuclear plant, which is, again, silly.
30% be worth another Fukushima or Chernobyl somewhere on Earth every 10 years. What area would have to be contaminated so we say no more? Where is the line? So, should we use nuclear energy? The risks may outweigh the benefits, and maybe we should stop looking into this direction and drop this technology for good. If you want to hear the...
Man, Kurzgesagt's clearly come a long way with this. So, to recap, one, talking about proliferation. Okay, that's a completely different spectrum of nuclear energy from nuclear power generation. I'm not even going to get into the arguments about did nuclear weapons actually prevent a whole bunch of wars or that sort of thing, but again, that's more in the weapons thing. Two, the waste, largely overblown in terms of waste by volume relative to waste from other energy products. We're dealing with not very much, and all of it is in controlled, highly regulated sites, usually at the same facility a nuclear plant is located at. And the accidents, Kurzgesagt apparently changed their mind in a later video on this. The quickest way would just be to watch their more up-to-date video that's entitled Nuclear Death. So, wow, this one's pretty dated. All right, and now for the last of this video, 3 reasons why nuclear energy is awesome. Let's take a look.
We should continue using nuclear energy. 1. Nuclear energy saves lives. In 2013, a study
This will probably offend no one and lead to some very civil discussions. Yeah, I agree.
conducted by NASA found that nuclear energy has prevented around 1.8 million deaths. Even if you include the death tolls from Chernobyl and Fukushima, nuclear energy ranks last in death per energy unit produced. While nuclear waste is toxic, it's usually stored somewhere, while the toxic byproducts of fossil fuels are pumped into the air we breathe every day. So, just by reducing the amount of fossil fuels burned, countless cases of cancer or lung disease and accidents in coal mines have been avoided. If we can choose between lots of dangerous stuff being put into a deep hole and lots and lots and lots of dangerous stuff being pumped into the atmosphere, the former seems more logical. Nuclear energy feels way more dangerous though. Single catastrophic events burn into our memory, while coal and oil kill silently. It's like the death rate of flying versus driving.
Okay. Good illustration at actual risk versus perceived risk.
Even in the best case scenario, it would take at least 40 years to switch to 100% renewable energy. So for as long as we continue using fossil fuels, nuclear energy will save way more lives than it destroys. 2.
One thing about that, there's an interesting study. It's like how many people actually died as a result of Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima. And the number is higher. The number where you get into the thousands is based on how it warped public opinion so much that people invested more in fossil fuels, and those deaths are coming from fossil fuels because people wouldn't build as many nuclear plants. That's the real indirect deaths associated with those nuclear accidents.
Nuclear energy reduces CO2 emissions. Nuclear energy is arguably way less harmful to the environment in terms of climate change than fossil fuels, our main source of energy. Since 1976, about 64 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions have not been pumped out thanks to nuclear energy. And by the mid-21st century, that could amount to an additional 80 to 240 gigatons. Humanity's energy consumption is rising.
These numbers on emissions are a bit dated. Again, these videos are 7 years old. The number's higher now.
According to US government projections, China alone will add the equivalent of a new 600 megawatt coal plant every 10 days for the next 10 years. China already burns 4 billion tons of coal each year. Coal is cheap, relatively abundant, and easy to get to, so it's not likely that humanity will stop using it soon. Nuclear energy might be the only way of dampening the effects of climate change.
Again, a lot of countries are shifting away from coal, and the amount of coal has gone down since we're talking mid-2015, so I think this video is a bit old with its stats on coal.
Preventing a catastrophic man-made global warming. Compared to the other things we do, nuclear energy is relatively clean. So even if it is a good idea to quit nuclear energy long-term, it might be a good solution for the next 100 years or so compared to the alternatives.
We're going to get rid of it by 2115. Let's see what they're going to say with the alternative.
3. New technology.
Well, as far as the whole 2115 stuff, it'd be nice to see about nuclear fusion by then. It was 20 years away, 40 years ago, maybe by 2115. You could tell this video is a bit old. It's probably from 2015.
Maybe technology will solve the problem of nuclear waste and dangerous power plants. The nuclear reactors we've used so far are mostly outdated technology because nuclear innovation stopped in the 1970s. There are models like the thorium reactor.
That's true. A lot of it is old technology. Calling it outdated, as far as a process, I mean, again, a steam cycle's been around for 200 plus years. So I don't have a problem with the mechanism being outdated, but the actual technology and interfaces, man, super old school and very expensive to replace, like old computers. I remember the nuclear plant that I worked at had stuff from like the 1970s still in there. And it was going to be very expensive to replace all that stuff.
Solve the problem altogether. Thorium is abundant, really hard to turn into nuclear weapons, and up to 2 orders of magnitude less wasteful than current nuclear reactors. The waste material might also be only dangerous for a few hundred years, in contrast to a couple of thousand years. 1 ton of thorium...
Orange versus yellow. Again, neither of those colors are accurate.
Estimated to provide the same amount of energy as 200 tons of uranium or 3.5 million tons of coal. So while we cannot know for sure if alternative nuclear technology will keep its promises, shouldn't we at least do more research before we forego an opportunity to solve lots of humanity's current problems? It might not be an easy challenge, but that hasn't stopped us before. So, should we use nuclear energy? There are risks involved in any great human endeavor, and we have to make an informed decision rather than rely on gut feeling. If you want to hear the other side of the argument, or a short...
So I can tell from back then they just wanted to show both sides of the argument compared to where Kurzgesagt's at now in terms of being pretty supportive of it. It's interesting to look back at that sort of thing. But hey, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see y'all next time.